$1. The bid cut through the air like a blade, making the crowd explode in cruel laughter. Alara Vance trembled on the platform, not from the chill that pierced her tattered dress, but from the humiliation burning like a branding iron. $1 for an Omega, less than the price of a cheap meal. The auctioneer slammed his gavel down with disdain, but when she lifted her gaze, she met tempestuous blue eyes that did not laugh. What did this strange man want with her? Like and comment where you are watching if you want to know what happens when a king kneels before a $1 Omega. The stench of rotting wood and despair permeated every corner of the Blackwood Crossing market like a disease infiltrating the skin. Alara kept her eyes fixed on the uneven plank floor, counting each crack, each dark stain that could be dried blood or ancient tears. The air, thick with sweat, fear, and caked mud, clung to her throat with every painful breath. Her left leg throbbed beneath the weight of hours standing, the deformity caused by a childhood accident that the clan had refused to heal. To them, she was a lost investment since the age of 5. The cold iron of the shackles around her ankles had left permanent purple marks, constant reminders that she was merely merchandise awaiting a buyer. At 22 years of age, she had become the permanent leftover of the market, the damaged goods that nobody wanted to take home. Her dress, a cheap fabric once white but now displaying tones of gray and brown, hung loosely on her far too thin body. Small breasts barely filled the ripped neckline, and her ribs were visible through the worn material. Brown hair fell in greasy strands over her angular face, a natural curtain to conceal the sharp intelligence that gleamed in her green eyes like raw emeralds. The acidic scent of her own fear, mingled with dried sweat, created an oppressive aura of defeat that repelled even the most desperate buyers. For a selectively mute and physically imperfect Omega, invisibility remained the only defense she truly knew. The less she spoke, the fewer reasons she gave for being punished. The less she stood out, the smaller the chance of attracting unwanted attention from those types who purchased broken women for sadistic diversions. Her lips, chapped and cracked from acute dehydration, trembled slightly with each icy gust of wind that sliced through her thin, threadbare clothes. Her empty stomach contracted in painful, gnawing spasms, a constant, cruel reminder that she had not consumed a complete meal in 3 agonizing days. The traffickers economized on food for the leftovers. After all, why expend precious resources on mere merchandise that might never sell? The auctioneer, a corpulent man with gold teeth that glinted like counterfeit coins, sighed with mounting impatience. His greasy hands drummed against the wooden podium as his gaze swept over the increasingly scattered crowd. Sweat beaded on his bald forehead despite the biting cold, forming droplets that dripped onto the grease-stained sale documents. "Last call!" he bellowed, his voice hoarse from a day of incessant hawking. The echo of his voice bounced off the market's stone walls like a somber omen. "Does anyone wish to claim this special opportunity?" Low, cruel laughter echoed among the few men who still lingered in the square, their gazes raking Alara Vance's thin frame with the coldness of those appraising sickly cattle. She could feel the weight of those gazes like soiled hands upon her skin, and shrunk further, striving to become unseen. But no hand rose. No bid was cast. Alara pressed her eyes shut, the contained tears threatening to spill, as she prayed silently for a return to the dank cells in the rear. The fetid solitude was preferable to servitude at the whim of some sadist who would buy her for mere scraps, only to have something upon which to vent his frustrations. The silence stretched, a torturous eternity. The wind hissed through the wooden rafters above, crafting a ghostly lament that mirrored the despair within her heart. Then, a voice sliced through the stagnant air like a heated blade parting ice. $1. The bid resonated like a silent thunderclap, freezing every soul present for an instant. For a moment suspended in time, only the frigid wind answered, causing the market's tattered banners to undulate like dancing specters. Then the crowd erupted in laughter so cruel it sounded like claws raking raw stone. $1. someone echoed amidst hysterical guffaws. "By the moon's grace, even a rotten chicken fetches more." The auctioneer brought his gavel down with palpable disdain, evidently eager to cut his losses and shutter the market before the promised storm descended. "Sold to the $1 gentleman. May Celine have mercy on them both." Alara felt her stomach twist into tight knots, climbing her throat like bitter bile. Yet something inexplicable compelled her to lift her gaze. She anticipated a sadistic or mocking face, some pervert who saw in her a cheap opportunity for his sick fantasies. Mentally, she braced herself for crude lust or cold cruelty. Instead, she met eyes of tempestuous blue that held no laughter. There was no mockery in that penetrating gaze, no predatory lust, not even condescending pity. There was something deeper, something that made her skin tingle with an utterly unfamiliar sensation. It was as if those eyes saw her, truly saw her, for the first time in years. The man wore travel-worn garments that embraced a clearly athletic frame beneath the scuffed leather. His brown coat, though weathered, still sculpted broad shoulders and a solid chest that moved with controlled breath. His tall boots, caked with dry mud, hinted at extensive journeys through untamed territories. His cloak carried the scent of fresh rain and ancient pines, a clean, wild aroma starkly contrasting with the market's putrid stench. Nothing in his appearance was opulent. Nothing suggested immense wealth or high social standing. But a profound quality in his movements, an economy of motion, spoke of restrained power, a silent authority that caused the crowd to instinctively part as he ascended the creaking wooden steps of the stage. Alara Vance recoiled on instinct as he drew near, but he halted at a respectful distance that surprised her. He did not seize her like newly acquired property, nor scrutinize her like livestock at the auction. He did not touch her without permission, as other men did with women they deemed their possessions. Instead, he offered his right hand, palm upward, fingers relaxed and waiting. It was an invitation, not a command. An offer, not a demand. "My name is Kalen Thorne," he stated, his voice a hypnotic quality, deep and velvety like aged whiskey, yet with an underlying strength that made something within her chest vibrate in visceral response. "May I know yours?" The question struck her like lightning. It was the first time in years anyone had posed a query instead of issuing an order. The first time someone requested her name instead of simply branding her the lame one, or the mute, or that girl. Alara Vance gazed at the outstretched hand, calloused, strong, yet extended without coercion. His skin, sun-bronzed and etched with small scars, whispered of a life intensely lived. His fingers were long and elegant, but short, practical nails suggested manual labor. A visible blue vein pulsed vibrantly at his wrist. She imagined the sensation of that pulse against her own skin. The warmth from his open palm seemed to beckon her icy fingers, a potent promise of heat. For the first time in years, she possessed a genuine choice, however minuscule. She could refuse the offer and remain in her desolate place, or accept and uncover where this unexpected stranger might lead her. Hesitantly, trembling from both the bitter cold and an indefinable emotion, she placed her own calloused hand within his. The contact was electric. His skin felt surprisingly warm against the cold that numbed her fingers, and for a fleeting moment, an elemental current surged between them. Kalen Thorne gently closed his fingers around her hand, not squeezing, merely offering anchorage and profound warmth. "Alara," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse, emerging like a ghostly sigh. He nodded as if the name held true value, as if it were a precious gem deserving of careful keeping. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Alara." The way he pronounced her name, with genuine reverence, savoring each syllable, stirred something dangerously within her chest, something that had been dead for so long she had forgotten it could feel. The journey north commenced that very afternoon, stretching for 3 weeks that irrevocably altered everything Alara thought she knew about herself. In the initial days, she anticipated arduous labor on some remote farm. but Kalen defied every grim expectation in unsettling ways. He maintained a respectful distance that confounded her survival instincts. During the frigid nights, he offered his own cloak without drawing near. The residual warmth, imbued within the fabric, enveloped her like a shield, carrying that intoxicating aroma of pines and something profoundly masculine that made her stomach clench in a strange, unfamiliar way. When necessary, to assist her across icy streams or apply salves to painful blisters, his hands were impossibly gentle for a man of his apparent strength. Calloused by arduous work, yet capable of touches as soft as feathers, he tended to her injuries without invasive questions, adapted their pace to her lame leg, and never once demanded she speak. During the day, she secretly observed him performing camp tasks. The way he kindled fires was hypnotic, economical movements that spoke of a wild, innate experience. When he hunted, he moved with a predatory silence that should have terrified her, yet awakened a dangerous curiosity. He was brutally, rawly handsome in a masculine way. Dark hair in disheveled waves, a strong jawline often shadowed by stubble that gave him a primal air. But it was his stormy blue eyes that disturbed her most deeply. Sometimes she caught him gazing at her with an indecipherable expression. Not obvious lust, but something more subtle, more perilous. As if he were attempting to solve a riddle where she was the misfitting piece. The decisive moment arrived on the 10th day, when a sudden storm forced them to share shelter within a narrow cave. Pressed side by side against cold stone, Alara trembled violently until Kalen opened his cloak and pulled her against his chest. The contact was devastating. She could feel every breath, the steady beat of his heart, the heat through his thin shirt. His scent completely enveloped her as she allowed herself to feel safe for the first time in years. But a different tension was growing, an electric current that made her skin tingle where they touched. When they separated after the storm had passed, he looked at her with an intensity that made her stomach do dangerous somersaults. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her, but then he pulled away, running a hand through his hair in obvious frustration. From that night onward, the tension between them grew almost palpable. Lingering glances, accidental touches that made them recoil as if burned, loaded silences vibrating with unspoken truths. It was only as they neared the Shadowfell range that Alara realized her romantic musings might have been woefully naive. They were not headed for any farm. Kalen was leading her into territories that only royalty or outlaws dared to traverse. The first true clue to Kalen's real identity arrived with brutal force. They were ambushed at the border by 4 renegades who sprang from the rocks like famished specters. Kalen did not merely fight. He moved with a lethal precision no ordinary wolf could possess. His eyes blazed with a regal gold for a few fleeting seconds before dimming back to tempestuous blue. And when he finished, the 4 attackers lay dead on the ground, their throats ripped open with surgical exactitude. Alara, hidden behind a boulder as he had commanded, watched it all with wide, disbelieving eyes. But it was when he bent to wipe his bloodied hands on the grass that she saw it. The ring bearing the royal crest, meticulously concealed beneath his gloves. The ice wolf emblazoned in ancient silver. Her blood froze in her veins. Kalen Thorne, the Alpha King of the North, the continent's most feared predator, renowned for his brutal efficacy against enemies and his legendary military acumen. Whispers claimed he could track an enemy across 3 lands, his pack never having known defeat. Fear paralyzed her, a liquid ice coursing through her veins. Why would a king purchase a broken Omega for a mere $1? What political machination lurked behind this facade? Was she merely bait for some elaborate trap? Or worse yet, was she nothing more than a temporary plaything for royal amusement? For the rest of their journey to the Frostguard Citadel, these questions hammered at her mind like war drums. Kalen offered no voluntary explanations, and she dared not voice the inquiries that burned in her throat. The silence between them now bore the crushing weight of untold secrets and an entirely new tension. She was no longer merely a refugee, traveling with a benevolent stranger. She was a possession of one of the continent's most formidable, perilous men. The answer to his true intentions arrived not with words, but with the dramatic shift in scenery that awaited her. As they passed through the massive gates of the Frostguard citadel, the royal guard did not seize him as she had secretly hoped. Instead, they knelt. All of them. A formidable line of warriors, capable of crushing entire armies, bowed their heads in unanimous deference. "Your Majesty," the captain of the guard intoned, "welcome home." Alara felt her knees buckle. She had been purchased by the king. The damned Alpha King had paid $1 for her at the slave market as if she were... What? A jest? A lost wager? The arrival at the palace marked the moment her reality completely shattered. Instead of being led to the servants' quarters or the dungeons, as any sane person would have expected, Alara Vance was guided through corridors of white marble to a luxurious guest wing. The room assigned to her was larger than the entire house where she had grown up. Persian rugs covered the polished floor, a fireplace crackled warmly against one wall, and the bed featured silk sheets that felt like clouds beneath her rough fingers. A silent maid brought hot water for bathing, clean clothes, and real food, not the moldy scraps that had comprised her meals for years. Alara Vance ate slowly, fearful that everything might vanish if she blinked too quickly. It was then that Calen Thorne appeared in the doorway. But he was no longer the travel-worn wanderer she had known. He was clad in the ceremonial armor of the kings of the north, black leather intricately worked with silver threads, a cloak lined with white wolf fur, and the ice wolf crown that was legend among the packs. He looked precisely what he was, an alpha predator at the zenith of his power. Alara Vance recoiled instinctively, but then something impossible transpired. He knelt. The Alpha King, the man who could command the deaths of thousands with a mere gesture, placed one knee upon the ground before the $1 Omega. "Alara Vance," he uttered, his voice laden with a gravitas that thickened the very air. "I need to tell you the truth about why you are here." She stared at him, rendered mute by absolute shock. "My purchase was not an act of possession. It was a rescue." He withdrew a folded document from the inner pocket of his armor. "I lead a clandestine operation to dismantle the bride markets sanctioned by the Lycan Council. I employ disguises to gather evidence and save the victims the system deliberately ignores." His words seemed to echo from a great distance. Alara Vance blinked several times, striving to process information that defied everything she thought she knew about her plight. "This," he extended the document, "is your legal freedom. And this," he produced another paper, "is a lifetime pension bond. You may go wherever you wish, live however you desire. Never again will you be anyone's property." Alara Vance gazed at the documents as if they were alien artifacts. Freedom. The word felt foreign even within her own thoughts. "But," Calen Thorne continued, and she could sense the tension in the word, "there is a complication. To safeguard the operation and ensure your security against the Council's spies who witnessed us at the market, we must maintain the pretense that you are my wife for 6 months. Merely a political charade. You would have your own quarters, your own life. At the culmination of this period, you will be entirely free to depart." Alara Vance took the documents with trembling hands, barely believing what her eyes scanned. Her own signature there would render her a free person for the first time since childhood. But the instant the quill touched the parchment, something shifted. The chronic stress and the chemical suppressants traffickers had coerced into her system for years finally dissipated. Her true essence, unburdened by narcotics and ceaseless dread, unfurled like a bloom after an arduous winter. Her natural scent, wild sandalwood intertwined with golden honey, permeated the chamber's air. Calen Thorne froze, an alabaster statue. His nostrils flared, and his eyes widened in primal, undeniable recognition. Mate. The word reverberated between them, unspoken, born by their species' most ancient instinct. Fate had played a cruel trick. The woman he had saved out of pity was his destined mate. Yet, instead of jubilant revelation, Kaylin's countenance hardened into a mask of profound internal conflict. Elara Vance saw the struggle unfolding behind those cerulean eyes. Desire battling principles, destiny fighting free will. His nostrils flared again, as if he were attempting to commit to memory or to flee the potent aroma now emanating from her. The air between them became charged with a primitive, undeniable tension. Each breath seemed to draw in more of the sandalwood and honey scent that now flowed freely from her skin, and she could perceive the profound effect it had upon him. His fists clenched at his sides, his jaw muscles taut, and a feral hunger glinted in his eyes, causing her to tremble, not from fear, but from an anticipation she dared not name. For a fraught and eternal moment, he seemed poised to advance towards her. His eyes swept over her face, descended to her parted lips, then to the accelerated pulse in her throat. She could perceive the heat radiating from him even across the expanse, could discern his breathing growing heavier, more meticulously controlled. "Elara," he began, his voice a guttural rasp that made something primal deep in her core clench with an unbearable intensity. For a second she thought he would traverse the space between them, that he would claim what destiny had declared rightfully his. But then he halted abruptly, as if colliding with an unseen barrier. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a telltale sign of intense internal warfare. "I need fresh air," he said finally, the words forced and controlled. "Rest. We will converse tomorrow." And he departed, leaving her solitary with the truth suspended between them like a honed blade, and the permeating aroma of her own burgeoning sexuality suffusing the chamber's air. That night, Elara Vance remained awake for hours, touching the spot where he had touched her face, striving to comprehend what had transpired between them. The air still carried the scent of his masculine presence mingled with her own awakening mate scent. She knew, with an inherent, primal certainty, that nothing would ever be the same after that silent revelation. What she did not know was that Kaylin Thorne was on the other side of the door, leaning against the cold marble wall, battling the primal urge to return and claim what destiny had declared his. Kaylin chose to conceal that she was his mate, yet secrets possess a life of their own when they involve fated werewolves, steeped in painful denial. The subsequent months within the palace became a dangerous ballet of appearances and suppressed emotions. Elara Vance, now the official queen consort, began to perceive truths beyond the gilded crown, and what she unearthed deeply unsettled her spirit. Kaylin worked late into the night, meticulously avoiding intimate dinners that had transformed into minefields of volatile sexual tension. In the labyrinthine corridors, they maintained a carefully measured distance, close enough for public pretense, yet far enough to avert any accidental contact that would leave them trembling. But it proved impossible to ignore the bond pulsating between them like a shared heartbeat. Elara felt his emotions ripple through the very walls. When he was frustrated by military reports, she would experience an inexplicable tension coiling in her shoulders. When plagued by political decisions, she found herself pacing restlessly, driven by a nameless disquiet. Even more perturbing were the fragmented dreams she occasionally caught, searing flashes where strong hands caressed her in ways that made her awaken breathless and flushed with heat. During public appearances, their potent chemistry was utterly impossible to conceal. When he offered his arm to escort her, the sheer contact through their gloves was enough to make her breath catch in her throat. When he murmured in her ear during grand banquets, the scorching warmth of his breath against her skin made her tremble. One sleepless night, she discovered Kaylin in the library, hunched over maps, his eyes burning red with exhaustion. Piles of reports detailing slave markets covered every available surface. Some pages were stained with the ghosts of dried tears. It was then that he spoke of Lila Thorne, his 16-year-old sister, abducted during a vicious attack on their summer palace. Kaylin had arrived at her chambers to find shattered windows, blood marring the walls, no sign of life. She used to draw little sketches of flowers, he said, his voice cracking with a raw ache. I kept them all. Without thought, Alara placed her hand upon his shoulder. The contact was electric, the very first time she had touched him voluntarily since the formal freedom documents had been signed. Kaelin froze, his powerful muscles tensing like taut strings. She felt the searing heat through his shirt, heard the ragged cadence of his breathing. Kaelin, she whispered. He rose slowly, turning to face her, dangerously close. She could discern golden nuances shimmering in his stormy blue eyes, feel his heat radiating like a forge. Alara, he said, his voice little more than a guttural growl. You shouldn't be here. Why? Why can't you be in the same room without looking tortured? You know why. I don't know. You brought me here, offered me freedom, yet you act as if my presence is a punishment. Punishment? The word ripped from him like a primal growl. Do you think I find you unbearable? Before she could answer, he pulled her against him with a primal need. For a charged moment they were pressed together, breaths mingled, hearts pounding. You are the furthest thing from unbearable I have ever encountered, he murmured against her hair. But then, as if seared, he released her and recoiled. Go, please. Before I do something we cannot undo. The encounter changed everything. From that night, a silent courtship began through gifts, rare books, drawing materials, a sandalwood cane for her, enhanced maps and strategic analyses for him. It was a perilous dance of approach and retreat. Each gift carried an unspoken message. Each note left was a disguised confession. Alara Vance began to live for these moments of secret connection, but she also sensed they were treading on a minefield. How long could they maintain this charade before something exploded? The answer came in a more cruel form than she had imagined. During a morning Lycan council meeting, she noticed strange glances exchanged between some members when her name was mentioned. General Alaric Stone, in particular, smiled in a way that made her blood run cold. Something was being plotted in the shadows, and she had a terrible feeling she was the target. But before she could fully decipher the threat, the decisive moment arrived when a visiting alpha demonstrated obvious interest in Alara Vance during a diplomatic reception. It was exactly the moment General Alaric Stone had been waiting for to strike. The tension exploded in the form of General Alaric Stone, the late king's younger brother, and Kaelin Thorne's uncle. General Alaric Stone viewed Alara Vance as a biological contamination to the royal lineage, a flawed omega of low origin who would stain any future offspring. He initiated a subtle campaign of sabotage intended to force Kaelin Thorne to discard her. General Alaric Stone sabotaged Alara Vance's pain medication, replacing them with placebos that intensified her physical agony. He spread rumors about her mental unsuitability among the courtiers. He orchestrated minor accidents, a loose step here, a puddle of icy water there, designed to highlight her physical disability. The final attack came during a crucial diplomatic banquet with representatives from 3 allied territories. Alara Vance, already weakened by constant pain and sleep deprivation, collapsed in the middle of the main hall. Her leg gave out first, then her entire body followed, convulsing in agony as the overdose of the falsified medication coursed through her veins. The scandal was instantaneous. Venomous whispers about the unsuitable queen spread through the room like wildfire through dry tinder. Kaelin Thorne knelt beside her, but the political damage was already done. It was in this moment of extreme vulnerability that something extraordinary happened. Alara Vance, feverish and delirious, accidentally activated an ancestral ability that had slumbered in her lineage for generations: the voice of truth. It was a rare gift of the ancient Omegas that compelled any werewolf within earshot to reveal their true intentions. "Who?" she whispered with a voice that echoed supernaturally through the hall. "Who here desires my death?" The magical compulsion spread like unseen ripples. 3 people in the hall shifted involuntarily. A servant girl flinched. A guard averted his gaze, and Ambassador Sterling Reed, the official representative from the Eastern Territory, suddenly cried out, "I report everything to the Lycan Council. Every word, every movement. They pay in gold for information on the rescue operation." The silence that followed was deafening. Kalen Thorne rose slowly, his eyes gleaming golden with contained fury. Within seconds, loyal guards surrounded the exposed spy. Alara Vance had saved not only Kalen's life, but the entire secret operation that had freed hundreds of victims. But now she herself had become a target of incalculable value to the Lycan Council. The third structural event was the mutual discovery that could no longer be denied. After the attack, when Alara Vance had saved his life by exposing the spy through her voice of truth, Kalen Thorne could no longer maintain the charade that was slowly killing them both. She was in the Royal Infirmary, still weak but conscious, when he entered the room and locked the door behind him. The silence between them was laden with 3 months of denial and repressed desire. "We need to talk," he said, but his voice came out rougher than usual. "About what?" she asked, though they both knew perfectly well about what. Instead of answering immediately, Kalen Thorne moved closer to the bed where she lay. Each step he took made the air grow denser, more charged with a tension that had accumulated for far too long. When he sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipped slightly under his weight, causing her to roll gently toward him. "About this," he finally said, reaching out to touch her face. The contact was devastating. The moment his fingertips met her skin, the connection they had denied for months exploded between them like a dam breaking. Alara Vance felt the bond forming like deep roots intertwining within her soul, warm and inevitable and absolutely certain. But with the connection also came betrayal. "You knew," she whispered, tears burning her eyes. "All this time, you knew we were mates, and let me believe it was just charity." Kalen Thorne closed his eyes as if in physical pain. "Yes." "Why?" The word came out as a lament that seemed to tear something inside his chest. "Why did you let me spend months wondering why you could barely stand to be in the same room as me? Why did you let me believe I was worth nothing to you?" "Because..." He opened his eyes, and she saw true anguish there. "I wanted you to stay by choice, not by biological imperative. I wanted you to love me as a man, not as a destiny imposed by the universe." The profound pain in his voice was genuine, but Alara Vance felt betrayed by his silence in a way that cut deeper than any physical wound. "You stole my choice anyway," she said, her own voice fracturing. "You let me believe I was a burden you bore out of nobility, that every moment you spent near me was sacrifice." "Alara..." "No," she interrupted him, forcing herself to sit up, despite the weakness that made her dizzy. "Do you want to know what my real choice was? Do you want to know what I would decide if I had all the information?" He looked at her with a mix of hope and terror that shattered her heart. "I would choose you," she said, the words a confession ripped from her chest. "Mate or not, destiny or not, I would choose you. Because you saw me when I was invisible. Because you cared for me when I was broken. Because you treated me as if I was worth something when the whole world decided I was worth nothing." The relief that passed over Kalen Thorne's face was so intense it seemed physical. He leaned forward, forehead against hers, warm breath mingling between them. "Alara," he murmured, and she could feel the words vibrating through her skin. "I was so afraid." "Of what?" "That you would feel like a prisoner of fate. That you would hate me for having forced this upon you." His hands found her face, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "That you would discover I think of you every night. That your scent drives me wild. That I have to pull myself away from you so I don't do things a gentleman shouldn't do." The raw confession made something deep in her core clench violently. "What kind of things?" His eyes darkened until they were almost black. Things that involve you groaning my name. Things that involve my mouth exploring every inch of your skin. Things that involve you coming completely undone in my hands. Her breath utterly failed. Kaelin. Now you know, he said, his voice a low growl. Now you know why I cannot be near you without torturing myself. Why every second in your presence is simultaneously paradise and hell. The reconciliation would have been sweet, complete, devastating, if it weren't for the sound of boots marching down the corridor that made them quickly break apart. A moment later, someone knocked on the door with military urgency. The fragile moment between them shattered like glass. General Alaric Stone entered, but not alone. He was accompanied by 5 members of the Lycan Council, each wearing the ceremonial red robes that signified official business. Kaelin Thorne, Elder Silas Croft of the Lycan Council proclaimed, his voice imbued with the gravity of centuries-old laws. By the authority vested in us through the ancestral codes, we invoke the law of disputed property. Kaelin rose slowly, positioning himself deliberately between Ilara and the officials. Upon what grounds? The female known as Ilara was purchased for $1 in a legal transaction witnessed by hundreds. Croft held aloft a yellowed receipt, the very paper Kaelin had safeguarded as a stark reminder of his mission. According to the Lycan mercantile codes, any transaction below $5 constitutes indentured servitude, not marriage. Therefore, her current status as royal consort is fraudulent. The trap was an exquisite, devastating snare. The receipt Kaelin had preserved as proof of the corrupt system had been deftly wielded as a weapon by his adversaries. Furthermore, the elder continued, the female has demonstrated possession of the voice of truth, an ancestral lineage ability considered extinct. The Council asserts the right of study under the law of preservation of ancestral magic. She will be transferred to our research facilities immediately. Ilara felt her world reel. Research facilities. She knew precisely what that entailed. They would dissect her abilities, her mind, her very body, until they comprehended how to replicate or command her gift. She would become a laboratory experiment, prodded and probed until she succumbed to death or madness. Kaelin's voice, sharp as a blade, sliced through her spiraling terror. I refuse to surrender her. Then you choose war? Elder Croft's smile was a frigid, cruel line. Your army is depleted by winter campaigns. Your coffers are drained by your philanthropic rescue operations. Fight us, and you will forfeit everything. Submit, and retain your crown. Silence stretched taut, like a strained wire about to snap. Everyone in the chamber grasped the stark arithmetic of power. Kaelin's forces, loyal yet utterly exhausted, could not prevail against the combined might of 5 council territories. But to surrender, Ilara meant consigning his soulmate to chambers of torment. Ilara gazed at the man who had seen her when the world rendered her invisible. The man who had knelt before her when she was worth merely $1. The man who had granted her freedom simply to witness her smile. In that profound moment, a revelation struck her, altering everything. Her limping gait, her fractured voice, her arduous past, none of it diminished her worth in his eyes. If anything, these very elements were the reasons he fought so ferociously to safeguard her. She was not his burden. She was his purpose, and she would not permit him to destroy himself for her. Wait, she declared, forcing her voice to carry through the hushed hall. I have something to say. She rose on unsteady legs, swaying but resolute. Then, harnessing the potent ability that had exposed the spy, she employed her voice of truth, not against her enemies, but upon herself. I manipulated the king, she declared, the magical compulsion ensuring everyone believed her words. I used feminine wiles and omega pheromones to cloud his judgment. I seduced him into this marriage for personal gain. The fault is mine, not his. It was a lie, Yet spoken with the voice of truth, it became legally real. She had just sacrificed her own standing to save his crown. Kaelin gazed at her, aghast. "Elara, no. The king is innocent of all accusations," she continued. "I release him from any obligation to protect me. Let the Lycan Council take what they came for." But Kaelin refused to let her sacrifice remain. He drew his magic sword, not to fight, but to cut something far more precious. With a swift stroke, he severed the royal seal from his own cloak, the silver threads scattering like fresh snow across the stone floor. "I abdicate," he announced, his voice reverberating with absolute finality. "Effective immediately, I relinquish all titles, lands, and privileges of the crown." The Lycan Council members recoiled as if struck. "You cannot. A king without his queen is merely a man with a golden hat," Kaelin declared. "By relinquishing the crown, I annul your jurisdiction over me and my property. I am now a lone werewolf, and by wild law, any werewolf may challenge the Lycan Council for an unjustly claimed mate through the blood trial." The ancestral law was rarely invoked, but it was unbreakable. In ancient times, before councils and territories, werewolves settled disputes through individual combat. A lone werewolf could claim justice for his mate by defeating the council's champion in single combat. Elder Silas Croft's face twisted with barely contained fury. "You would risk your life for a broken Omega?" Kaelin's smile was sharp as winter steel. "My life became worth living the day I paid $1 for her." The trial was set for dawn. The combat circle was drawn in the ancestral style, a ring of blazing torches in the snow-covered courtyard, witnesses arranged in tiers according to pack hierarchy. Kaelin stood at the center, clad only in trousers and boots, without armor, without weapons save his claws and fangs. He had forfeited the right to royal accoutrements when he abdicated. The Lycan Council's champion was a monster named Borin, a beta who had never lost a challenge. He stood 7 feet tall, crisscrossed with scars mapping every inch of exposed skin, his muscularity so extreme it defied anatomical logic. Worse, he was fresh and well-fed, while Kaelin was already weakened by months of the hereditary curse gnawing at his vitality. But Elara, watching from the witness platform, had realized something crucial about her own nature. Her voice of truth did not merely reveal truths, it held the capacity to heal falsehoods, even those biological. The malformation of her leg was not a natural flaw. It was an ancestral seal, placed by ancient magic to contain an excess of curative power that would have overwhelmed a child's fragile form. Her forebears had bound the gift for her protection, but now she commanded the strength to wield it. The titanic struggle commenced with the first ray of dawn. Borin moved like an avalanche, a colossal, indomitable force, pulverizing all in his path. Kaelin dodged and struck with surgical precision, yet each blow that landed barely seemed to register on the Titan. Meanwhile, Kaelin was demonstrably faltering. His breathing grew laborious with alarming swiftness. His movements, though elegant, conspicuously lacked the devastating power his reputation promised. Elara discerned the insidious thorn's blood curse weaving through his very being like a virulent poison. Each harrowing transformation during the fight further enervated him. He was, before her eyes, slowly succumbing to demise. Borin's colossal fist connected with Kaelin's ribs, and the piercing crack of splintering bone reverberated through the desolate courtyard. Kaelin staggered, crimson ichor trickling from his mouth, yet with an iron will, he forced himself upright. It was then that Elara solidified her momentous resolve. Rising from the bench amidst the guards' clamorous protests, she pressed both hands against the ancient sealed wound upon her leg. The agony was instantaneous and exquisitely excruciating, a searing torment akin to reshattering a mended bone. But as the ancestral seal shattered, power coursed through her form like incandescent liquid sunlight. Through the profound mate bond she had at last embraced, she channeled every atom of surging healing energy toward Kaelin. The very connection that had once plagued them with its persistent denial now blossomed into their unequivocal salvation. Kalen's transformation was both immediate and breathtakingly dramatic. Vital color surged back into his pallid skin. His every movement regained its lethal, predatory grace. The hereditary curse, which had slowly stolen his life force, melted under the deluge of restorative magic flowing from his cherished mate. Boren realized, with chilling, belated terror, that his quarry had, in an instant, metamorphosed into the apex predator. Kalen moved like lightning incarnate, striking with a precision almost artistic in its inherent brutality. The colossal champion, who had never known defeat, found himself utterly outmatched by a werewolf who fought not for fleeting glory or stern duty, but for a love that transcended earthly bounds. The mortal blow came when Kalen's honed claws rent Boren's throat in one clean, devastating motion. The champion collapsed like a felled mountain, and the ancient wild law was irrevocably satisfied. 6 months following that pivotal trial, the very foundations of their world had irrevocably shifted. The Lycan Council was summarily dissolved and meticulously rebuilt from its genesis. The archaic laws governing Omegas were profoundly redrafted. The abhorrent slave markets were incinerated to cinders. Kalen did not reclaim his antiquated crown. Instead, he and Alara forged something entirely nascent, a progressive, constitutional monarchy that artfully balanced royal authority with democratic oversight. Alara Vance never miraculously healed. She still walked with a pronounced limp, reliant on an elegant silver cane Kalen Thorne had commissioned from the kingdom's finest artisans. Her voice, too, would still falter when exhaustion claimed her, diminishing into whispers only he possessed the intuition to decipher. Yet, she now presided over the Council of Social Reform. Her strategic mind finally granted the formidable platform it so richly deserved. The final scene found them back where their saga had commenced. The venerable Blackwood Crossing Market, now transformed into a vibrant community center and school for rescued children. Alara Vance instructed in literacy and composition, while Kalen Thorne imparted practical skills such as hunting and self-defense. Within a frame on the new center's wall hung that yellowed receipt. $1, paid in full. It stood not as a symbol of shame, but as a poignant reminder that the worth of a soul is determined by the depth of love it inspires, not by the paltry sum the world is willing to bestow. When Kalen Thorne knelt once more that evening, it was not in a grandiose display or a political theater. He simply knelt to tie her untangled shoelace, a tender moment of domestic service that spoke volumes more than any crown could ever proclaim. Alara Vance smiled, her fingers intertwining in his dark hair. "My $1 king," she whispered. "Your king in all things," he vowed, pressing a reverent kiss to her palm. She was finally whole, not because she had been mended or cured or rendered flawless, but because she had been truly seen. And in his eyes, she remained eternally priceless. If you cherish this tale of a rejected Omega who discovered her true worth when a king truly knelt for her, subscribe for more epic Lycan King romances. Activate the notification bell so you never miss new stories of intertwined destinies and loves that defy the entire world. Remember, the worth of a soul is never determined by the price the world places upon it, but by the love someone is willing to give for it.